Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 2nd of October 2023. Not quite sure which channel this will end up being on. It all depends. Thank you for your patience with that regard. And on that note, it is, I did mention this yesterday, but Combat Veteran Reacts, a YouTube channel, Paul, who is a combat veteran, reacting to Ukrainian footage and giving his analysis. He has been hit by a similar, well, exactly the same issue with regard to the Russian, Indian entity making false copyright infringement claims, probably through Russia, right? On his channel, so we are having the same experience. I'm in touch with him. Thank you for so many people who try to tell me that or succeeded in telling me that. So that's really interesting. Sorry that I didn't get to do the live stream with Operator Starsky last night. Apparently, he was supposed to do a couple of ones yesterday and didn't turn up for any of them. He's quite possibly in a war zone, right? And has other things on his mind than doing interviews on YouTube. So, just whatever it takes, he needs to do. And hopefully, I'll be able to hook up with him and do that live stream interview. It may happen today. He said the 1st or 2nd, but I'm not particularly hopeful it will happen today either. Apologies, but I'm sure you understand. Lots more kind of housekeeping things to say, but I might keep a couple of them till the end. So for the time being, let's get stuck into the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find them in my description to the video below. There were 510 personnel lost, which is actually quite a bit of an uptick from last week, where it's been down in the 300s, in the 400s yesterday, up to 510 today, or yesterday. So that, or for the time period of yesterday. So that is possibly telling us something. 15 tanks is a high number of tanks to lose. 9 armored personnel vehicles, again high. Some people say Mondays can be quiet, could be due to it being Sunday yesterday, but that's not what we're seeing from the figures today. It is rather variable, that idea that it's quiet at the weekends. I quite often see it quieter, but not all the time. 48 artillery systems is just phenomenal. So one thing I do want to say, I was quite negative on how I think Ukraine are culminating in the on the front line, in particular the Robotina area here. By the way, I've changed the colours of the trenches. I had a couple of complaints that they were green and people with colour blindness couldn't see them. So hopefully this was a colour I wanted anyway. So I just haven't got around to doing it. Apologies. Anyway, this is taken with a load of caveats, right? So one, the Ukrainians arguably still have quite a bit in reserve in terms of equipment and potentially personnel, although I would doubt it's enough to make serious advances. But I wonder how many of the troops they need to clear trench lines, if they're having to do it kind of by hand, if you like, how many of those they have. So they've probably got quite a few decent mechanized units that can do the work after they break through the trenches, possibly, but I don't know. So there's arguments to be had over how much stuff the Ukrainians have still left to throw at places like Robotina. There's also what is going on outside of the immediate front lines, right? And this is where these figures come in handy, because we have an idea that the Russians are losing quite a bit of equipment, but when they're taking 48 artillery systems, 3 multiple launch rocket systems, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems losses, 26 other vehicles, 5 pieces of special equipment across these categories, when they're losing that, if that is true, or even if you take 20% off of those figures, then that is a massive loss for the Russians in one single day. So there are elements, and this is what Dom Nichols from the Ukraine the Latest podcast was saying the other day, and I played that to you in one of my videos, which is sometimes it's like looking through a straw, right? You're looking through a straw down at what's going on here, and you get this very small picture of a very tiny area of Ukraine, and you think, well, the Ukrainians are struggling to move on. But actually, when you zoom right out, you get an idea of lots of things that are going on. The hits on Crimea, the taking of these rigs, the hits on the Kerch Bridge, the drone attacks into Russia, and we'll learn a little bit more about that soon. What's going on in Bakhmut? The attrition of the Russian artillery right up and down the front line, so on and so forth. Logistics hubs being hammered. You get a sense that actually it's not just about how well they take territory. It's not about the kilometers in Robotina or Verbove. But the flip side is, but actually they need to take territory eventually. Like that's their ultimate game and objective, right? So it is important, but it's not the only thing that's happening. So there are different ways of measuring success. So if you include all of these elements as part of the counteroffensive, then you can argue that the counteroffensive has been incredibly successful looking at other metrics other than kilometers gained, right? So it's just worth bearing that in mind. So I'm making claims, speculating about the potential culmination of the Ukrainian forces in this area here, but that doesn't mean to say that they aren't doing stuff outside of that. So to go back to these figures, artillery losses are huge. Vehicles and fuel tanks, that category is substantial again, 26 losses there. 3 MLRS and 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems and 5 pieces of special equipment are high losses in those categories. Right, they are over the average. So yesterday, you can argue, was a good day for the Ukrainians in terms of what they've claimed. In terms of the video footage coming out, Andrew Perpetua, the mapper I depend a lot on, has totted up what he has, and it looks like parity. Well, no, sorry, it looks like the Ukrainians have lost more, and they have, although a large proportion of that is civilian losses, probably from a couple of montage or maybe even a single montage video that has a number of vehicles taken out. But when it comes down to the higher value pieces of equipment, we have a radio altimeter taken out by a Lancet drone, and yes, there's a Marder thrown in there, but that's damaged. But other than that, it's not a huge number of losses there. When we look at the Russian losses, you've got some fairly substantial losses in terms of T-90M tanks, 2 of those. There's a high value, and a few other, and another tank there of unknown type. And then a few bits of artillery and an air defense system. That is somewhat. So if you look at all of the Russian losses, I'd say they're higher value than the Ukrainian losses. But the Ukrainians have lost, some useful things too. AS-90 is a self-propelled howitzer from the UK provided there. So, right, we'll move on. Trent Telenko here says, oh my, see the geolocation of where this Tor M. So we see a Tor M there, this one. And I showed you the video of this being taken out yesterday, or at least referenced it. So he's saying, look at the geolocation of where this is. And this goes back to the point I was just making about how the Ukrainians are having success in other ways. We have a Tor M air defense system that is behind Tokmak being taken out by a Gimler's shell. So this is guided multiple launch rocket systems. Now, this is taking out a piece of kit. So if we find how far that is from where they're going to be firing, it's somewhere down like there. So that's about 50 kilometers. So they're using a guided multiple launch rocket, so something like a HIMARS or similar, and taking out a high value bit of equipment there. And that's just one example, right? So you can imagine right throughout the region, the Ukrainians are degrading the Russian air defense capability, and that means that it allows the Ukrainians to do more. It's like this has a cumulative effect. When you start degrading things back here and even further, and all in this kind of area, you start taking a bit out there, piece out there, piece out there, piece out there. And if these figures are at least somewhat accurate, where they are losing 48 artillery systems and 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems and 3 multiple launch rocket systems in one day, right? Then you can imagine in this region, just at the screen we're looking at, the Ukrainians have probably degraded the Russians quite far back. And then that allows the Ukrainians to do more. That's a cumulative effect. But then they can send drones more easily further back behind the lines to do more damage. And in fact, I don't know if I've got it here, but there was another thread that I think was maybe a Trent Telenko thread talking about how important it is that the Ukrainians are now hitting places like 100 kilometers behind the front lines with drones, and being able to do these long distance drone attacks because they aren't being hit by electronic warfare and they aren't being hit by air defense systems, presumably because there's been a degradation of those capabilities for the Russians. So then that allows them to hit further things, and that degrades the Russians further, and then it allows them to do more. So it's kind of like a snowball effect potentially. That's the idea as far as I'm concerned. So again, the successes the Ukrainians are having in that kind of context are really important, and it's not just about the kilometers here. So what metrics are we using? I've talked a lot about that over time. So I thought that was worth pointing out. Now, there's plenty of videos of things getting blown up, normal kind of stuff. Here we have a Ukrainian forces scoring a direct hit on an entrenched Russian tank with a Gimler's rocket. This is a T-62 tank. The reason why this is, I picked this one out. I'm not going to show you because, you can, the link's in the description below, so you can go and check it out yourself. But anyway, that gets taken out by, say, Gimler's, maybe a HIMARS, whatever. And you're thinking, one that is using HIMARS, so that's quite high value piece of ordnance to take out slightly lower value stuff, but you can see that the trench lines are fairly well constructed here, look fairly new. We've got revetment, so these are decent Russian defenses. But I talked about how the T-60 tanks aren't being sent to the front lines to do, your I guess, frontline defending. So that's why we're seeing fewer of these lost at the moment, and we're seeing more T-90s, T-80s being lost, and that gives you an indication of what the Russians are using. That whole discussion I had earlier, like 2 or 3 days ago. But it also shows you that they're probably using T-62s as indirect fire, put them in a revetment, maybe elevate them slightly at the front, and these can act as a kind of poor man's artillery piece, right? And I'd imagine that's how they're using these T-62s. They might have more T-62 ammunition than they do, Jetsint or whatever 152mm artillery shells. So it might be that's what the Russians are doing. Anyway, that's what that video tells me. But again, it's a precision that the Ukrainians can hit the Russians with that I think they have an advantage with. But they are using things like Gimler's to do that. Which is what they're designed for, but as I've said many times, they're previously used for much higher value targets. Okay, big blaze in occupied Tavrisk yesterday. It's a small town over the river in the occupied part of Kherson Oblast near Novokakhovka. Locals say it's not due to shelling, but grass fires not tackled are now threatening homes. This is possibly another issue where you've got a summer that's been and gone, but you've got very dry grasses that if you have shelling, so there might well have been shelling taking place in the area, explosions, and then grass catching fire, but there's just isn't the infrastructure to do anything about it. Emergency services aren't going to be operating in remotely the same way they would be, during peacetime and whatnot. So that is something to consider. There are rumours, quite a few people are talking about this, Rob Lee talking about this morning, that Lieutenant General Andrei Ivanovich Siechovoy, commander of the Russian forces in the Western Military District, has been relieved of his command. Suspected reason is the horrendous losses resulting from the meat assault or counterattacks he ordered in Avdiivka and Klishchivka and Bakhmut. I don't know if that's Andriivka rather than Avdiivka. It's a mix of both. So I presume that's Andriivka. As a result of his and his senior officers' incompetence, at least 3 Russian brigades, 2nd Motor Rifle Brigade and 31st and 83rd Air Assault Brigades were destroyed or made combat ineffective during the battles there. This is not the first time his demise was announced prematurely, so file this one under maybe for now. Always, worth taking that advice. On the other hand, Russia has had multiple setbacks since the counteroffensive started and has failed to regain any land in the illegally annexed territories, although not a disaster at this point. Any expectations Putin had that Shoigu would have things under control by October have evaporated, and maybe more heads will begin to roll. Let the night of the long knives begin. I mean, I don't know if I'd read that much into this. I do wonder, and I said this yesterday, that even though the Ukrainians have kind of culminated here, that's going to be temporary before they can get enough stuff to carry on. But I think the importance of the air support is huge here. But I did also say yesterday that I don't think the Russians are in any place to do any offensive themselves. So it's not like, so what you might often see is like, well, like we saw last year, so the Ukrainians did a counteroffensive, the Russians did an offensive, Ukrainians did an offensive, and then you would expect the Russians to do an offensive going forward. But I don't know that the Russians are now in a good enough position to do a large scale offensive themselves. I don't know that they've got the equipment and the ammunition to do that, but I may be wrong on that one. But that's worth bearing in mind. And yeah, here we have activities of railroad partisans. So the management of Russian railways has asked the Russian government to allocate 300 billion rubles, more than $300 million, to counter threats. Given the specifics of the state-owned company, even if these funds are allocated, everyone realizes that most of them will be stolen, our source told us. According to him, this is from Nexter, according to him, there is a strong anxiety among employees in recent times, and sometimes it reaches panic, which affects the work of service of Russian railways. The fact is that the number of sabotages on railroads has increased by almost half in 2023 compared to 2021, and in 2022 it increased by 35%. As noted in the document, the number of sabotages on the railroads has increased dramatically, and only in the first half of 2023 were 610 relay cabinets were destroyed, 24 transformer substations, 36 power substations, 30 locomotives, and 12 railroad tanks. I have reported on some of these, but these kind of happen on an incredibly regular basis. I mean, more than one a day, right? This is tens of billions of rubles of damage and hundreds of billions of losses. That's not counting natural disasters and cataclysms. As noted in the document, this led to serious disruptions in the railway network system, delayed and cancelled trains, loss of cargo, reduction in the number of passengers, as well as threatening the lives of personnel. As noted, all these factors have led to the fact that Russian Railways itself is unable to counteract these problems. So they're asking for a bunch of money. There's another piece that it might be... I'm going to deal with it later. Let's see if I have it. There's another complaint that the Russians are unable to recruit. No, I think I've got it maybe for an extra. Unable to recruit the police, and they need... Basically, they're struggling in all elements of society. They need people for the front line, but they can't get people for the police to run stuff within particularly occupied territories of Ukraine. So your Zaporizhias and your Donbass and Kherson Oblast that the Russians occupy, they're just struggling. They're struggling for people. So when it comes back to me claiming that the Russians are not in a good place to do a counter offensive or an offensive, going forward, you kind of add these bits of the jigsaw up to see how much Russia is struggling just as a whole. They've got people that run away from the nation. They've got an economy that's tanking. They've got, again, I'm going to be talking about gas export issues. They're spending a third of their budget on the war. Things are desperate. Are they in a position to prosecute a serious offensive going forward? If they do, it'll be their last throw of their dice, surely. Right, let's go on to strikes. There's a lot of me doing speculation here rather than, on the money sort of bits of news. Last night, Russian attacked Ukraine with 7 Shahed drones. 4 of them were shot down. So you're thinking, okay, not many drones. We've had a lot of drones recently. But then, as is pointed out by the Kyiv Independent, Ukrainian forces shot down 4 of the 7 Shaheds. But Natalia Humeniuk, the spokesperson for the Southern Operational Command, has said on air that Russian forces launched only a small number of drones along an unusual route, and this is likely an attempt to locate Ukraine's air defenses. This is something that both sides do quite regularly, which is, have these winding kind of one-off or low number of drones or cruise missiles or whatever, and those are kind of sacrificial. They're not really massively intending on hitting some target at the end of it, although that might be an added bonus, but they're mainly sent on a winding path to see where the air defenses are, to try and bait them into shooting at them so they can locate air defenses and hit those air defenses at a later point, or not hit the air defenses, know that the air defenses are there, and then the next wave of attacks doesn't happen there, or does happen if there aren't air defenses. So it just lets you know what's a good route for your drones, or a better route for your drones to use. Right. Smolensk, Sochi, and Zhankoy were hit yesterday, as I reported. Um, Apparently, in the Sochi area, the GUR successfully attacked the parking lot of Russian helicopters in the Adler district of Sochi. I don't know of any details of anything actually being hit. I think in Sochi there is some video of just an explosion. Kind of doesn't look like it would have done any meaningful damage to multiple helicopters, but I don't know. Just that's my tuppence. But it looks like, I mean, when you do something like that, then it tells the Russians, hey, we know, the Ukrainians know where your helicopters are, and then they end up moving them back and then back and back, and eventually those helicopters are unusable because they've been moved so far back that they have no realistically effective flying time over the places they need to be in Ukraine. If you move them too far back, then it takes them most of their fuel to get to the front line, and they have very little time to do what they've got to do. That would be the ideal, right, for as far as Ukraine are concerned, right? Strike drones yesterday attacked a Russian aircraft factory in Smolensk. So this is building onto the helicopters parts in Sochi area. Well, in Smolensk, Kh-59 missiles are manufactured in a factory that was targeted. 3 of the 4 drones hit the target, the main intelligence directorate reported. Again, I don't know the damage. I don't know how effective that is in taking out those facilities, but that's exactly what you would want to see from the Ukrainians, which is hitting targets that are involved in the Russian production of munitions that are being sent against Ukraine. On the flip side, Ukraine received a number of S-300 missiles from Belgorod into Kharkiv. As a result, I think there's a first underground school has been opened or is being used in Kharkiv because they so consistently get hit by these missiles. Just to remind you where Kharkiv is, in case you are unaware, it's very close to the Russian border, and this is one of the cities that Russia was completely expecting to take control of. They thought it had a high proportion of pro-Russian speakers and high proportion of Russian speakers, and they make this connection that if you speak Russian, you are pro-Russian, and that's not the case. Go and see my interview with Anastasia Paraskevova from Kharkiv. I think it's on my Atypical Philosopher channel, where I interview her. She's a Russian speaker from Kharkiv, and she ain't pro-Russian, right? So they failed to get Kharkiv, but it's very close to Russia, so it just routinely gets hammered. At the beginning of the war, they shoved cluster munitions at Kharkiv, and just for a long time they've been hitting it with S-300 missiles. Okay, now moving on to other bits and pieces, and I do apologize, sorry not sorry, but I'm going to speak quite a bit about Elon Musk. And this is super important. Why is it super important? Because he's saying things now that are beyond the pale, and there is absolutely no doubt where his allegiances lie, and he's really, really annoyed a whole bunch of Ukrainians and pro-Ukrainians now. He's got to the point where he doesn't seem to care. Why is this important? He's one of the most important human beings on earth. He has more influence over the outcome of this war in terms of the information space and controlling that information space, which has now been shown by an EU report to be the worst place for Russian disinformation of all the social media platforms. He's opted out the voluntary code of conduct, so there's disinformation everywhere. And he has more money and influence over things like Starlink and the outcomes of Ukrainian military actions than any other human being, single human being. He's got more, like, do you know what the head of Vietnamese government said yesterday? Do you know what the head of the Botswanan government said? No? Okay, but you probably know what Elon Musk said. Right, so Elon Musk has reach that is far beyond entire countries. He has more money than entire countries, right? This guy's important. Anyway, what's he said? Well, it started yesterday for me anyway, when Ian Bremmer, who's a political scientist and really pretty important guy, the Russians got us into the fiasco. US NATO response was overwhelmingly bipartisan and transatlantic. Thankfully, neocons are small and no longer a decisive minority in the political spectrum. And Elon Musk just says Bremner is a bonehead. So you got someone saying, right, Russia is at fault here. It's really good we have bipartisan support for the US and NATO. And Elon Musk saying you're a bonehead, right? Why would you say? So basically, all this is saying is, hey, I'm pro-Russian. That's all it says. Like Jay in Kiev, who's a good source, says Musk meeting his daily quota of either praising Putin, attacking Putin's critics, what he's doing here, attacking Ukraine or any other country on Putin's acquisition list, parroting verbatim Kremlin issued narratives, all promoting those that do. His whole day is just this. Right. Then it got worse. And actually someone on my threads alerted me. Well, I didn't need alerting to this, I saw it. But someone on my thread said, look, I've just rejoined Twitter after not being on there for a long time because I wanted to know what's going on in the same way that I use it. And he said, and the first tweet I see is basically this, is Elon Musk flagging off Zelensky and taking a pro-Russian approach. He's like, I don't want this. And this is coming from the guy that runs it. Anyway, this is what has properly annoyed people. So Jake Bro says, President Zelensky is trying to stop a genocide while defending his people in the largest land war in Europe since World War II. And the richest man in the world now mocks him when Elon's companies only ever reached profitability thanks to government subsidies and taxpayer handouts. So Elon Musk says, when it's been 5 minutes and you haven't asked for $1 billion in aid, he's got a picture of Zelensky looking angry or whatever. So this is him basically slagging off Zelensky and Zelensky's desire to have aid to defend his entire country. Now, when you look below at what Elon Musk said, like loads of people who are involved in doing the kind of analysis I do are going absolutely nuts at Elon Musk. You know, people, Elon Musk previously asked, where's all the pro-Russian propaganda? We don't see it. No, you are it. You don't see it because you are it. You know, Republicans against Trump says, why do you mock a brave leader who leads his nation in its heroic fight for their freedom? Have you no shame? And Julia Davis, who's an excellent source, who does a Russian media monitor, because Zelensky dares to stand up to Putin and Elon never could. Anyway, it goes on and on. There's so much back and forth. Ballfellow could see do your stuff here. Now, he has, the problem is, right, and I know this is going to annoy some of you who are really big fans of him. You need to have nuance. Never put, I say this all the time, I'm going to say it again, never put a single human being on such a pedestal that no one can criticize them. If no one can criticize them, then you are treating them like a god, and you are treating criticism like blasphemy. Any individual that does that, you're giving them carte blanche to do anything. They can do the worst thing they want. Trump knew this. Like, Donald Trump, say what you like about Trump, but he said, I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and it won't make the blindest bit of difference. And he's absolutely right. He was absolutely right in that, because people put him on such a high pedestal that if he does something terrible, they can forgive him straight away for that. They can do no wrong. So if you're someone that thinks that Elon Musk can do no wrong, and you see me as criticizing him, and you have a go at me for doing that, and you think that I'm some liberal lefty with a bias, then it means he can do anything he wants. Now here, he is blindly, well, no, he's not blind. He is basically just taking the mickey out of Zelensky and ridiculing his desire to get aid to help his country in an existential crisis when it's the biggest war in Europe since World War II. Why would you take them? Why would you ridicule someone like that? That's the stuff of moral monsters, as far as I'm concerned. So Phillips O'Brien, who I rate as well, says, hi folks, never thought I'd have reached this point, but I'm finally thinking this is it for Twitter while Musk owns it. In the last few days, he's been whipping up anti-immigrant feeling, and he's now mocking a people fighting for their lives against a genocidal dictatorship. Now, I have a real problem. Like, I'm morally compromised because I've got to a point where I feel the same. However, there is, like, I literally wouldn't have a channel without what Twitter does, because it's just the best single point of all information coming in. If there was another site that offered that, I would be on it like a flash, but there is no other site that does it. So I am morally compromised, and that makes me feel really uncomfortable. But there's very little option for me. Ilya Ponomarenko, who is a great journalist who was formerly with the Kiev Independent, said, Elon Musk, was this so funny and butcher, lol, kek, LMAO, those Ukrainians. He's pretty angry, and he's going at this with sarcastic humor, which is digging up dead bodies in Butcher to do war crimes investigations. Is that Is that funny? Is that why you would take the mickey out of someone for desiring aid, to fight this? And then he later says, look, save your breath, people. The one who has never heard the roar of Russian artillery next to his or her neighborhood, who has never smelled the awful stench of a mass grave unearthed, who's got neither a heart nor a brain or some shame, will never understand. I mean, it is. This is riled people. And it's partly riled people because there's a hint of hypocrisy as well. So here's a country that's asking for aid because they're screwed, and if they don't get aid, they will die. It's literally, this is an existential crisis for them. If they don't get aid, they will die. Musk is taking the mickey out of that, but he's received aid, and when it wasn't an existential threat, this was so he can make money, right? Now, this is going back to 2021, but Business Insider here is reported on Elon Musk is speaking out against government subsidies. Here's a list of the billions of dollars his businesses has received. Now, I won't list each of these for you, but I will just put them on the screen. I will slowly scroll down here and show you all the contracts he's got, but then all the handouts he's got. And you can pause and read all these subsidies he's received in order to be in the position he is now in. And it's quite phenomenal, the leg ups he has received. Yep, great businessman. Yep, he's a visionary and all that kind of stuff. I'm not decrying the good things he's done. It's just, life is nuanced and people are complicated. And I think he is complicated. Oh, the Energy Department loans Tesla $465 million in 2010. Oh, right. Okay. All this kind of stuff. So, it is complicated, but I am at a point where, do you know what? I'm not going to stand by and not criticize this. People who love Musk will criticize me, and you'll do it in the threads below. But I've got to a point where no, it doesn't wash anymore. The guy has such importance and such reach in the world. You don't get to say that without pushback, and you don't get to wedge yourself into global geopolitics without really the requisite knowledge about the history and the politics of the region. And we know that because of the stuff that you parroted before, that is Kremlin talking points about like polling data and that, which is fundamentally flawed. Okay, so what I'd love this if someone could go out there and start a petition to get Timothy Snyder and Elon Musk to sit down and chat about this, because this is all about a lack of knowledge on Elon Musk's part. Why he's spouting this is because he's skewed, because it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you read all this kind of pro-Kremlin, David Sachs, John Mearsheimer sort of stuff, and then that's your world, then you are going to have these opinions. So you need to be set straight. You need to be educated. So sit down with Timothy Snyder, who's a historian with an absolutely voluminous knowledge of this conflict in this area. Sit down with him, have a chat, see if you can come to some kind of compromise together, or whether actually you can learn something, and will that change your opinion? So someone start that, please. Right, moving on. Russian propagandist Simonyan, this just, moving from one problem to another. Right, tonight a strike drone fell right in front of our ancestral home in Adler. We talked about Adler, and then the strike near Sochi, I think that was the Adler one, where my mother and I grew up, and my relatives still live with their small children. Oh, it does genuinely, that's terrible, right? The targets are getting farther away, the stakes are getting higher, and nuclear ultimatum is becoming more non-alternative. Oh, hang on. So now she's justifying a nuclear attack on Ukraine because her ancestral home was hit by a drone, or not her ancestral home, near her ancestral home was hit by a drone. Oh, and then she mentioned small children, where relatives live with small children. How about the anti-ship missile that slammed into the residential block at Dnipropetrovsk? How about that? How about you have that opinion about what your country has done to civilian targets in Russia? How about you cast that opinion about the massacre in Bucha? How about you have opinions of people being shot with their hands tied behind their backs in the back of the head? How about you have that opinion there? So, enough said, Simon Yan. 2-1. Right, this was quite. I mean, it's not new. It is news, but but I think it's pretty interesting. How not to advertise. So this is a butcher's shop in Tambov in central Russia. So it was decorated with an advert for donations to the Russian army. So help the Russian army, and under the signboard reads "Real meat products." It's a butcher shop. Real meat products. Russian army. Into the meat grinder. Anyway, just thought that was worthy of note. And then finally, with regard to other bits and pieces, Russian presidential fund allocated 1.6 billion rubles, $17 million, for a TV series about Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the festival Muzika Osvoich, which is music about our SMO fighters, so the special military operation, and a contest of Oleg Gazmanov's songs, who's a pro-war musician. In other words, they're giving $17 million to make TV propaganda, where at a time when money is tight, the economy's tanking, and they're in serious trouble. Why I'm including this, and this goes into, Anton Gerashchenko goes into all the details about these different projects that Russia's doing. Russia is ramping up its propaganda machine to reach all tiers of society. It is preparing its population for a long war, and with every means possible. Why this is, or available, why this is important is they are giving that amount of money to spend on ways of disinforming and manipulating their internal population, their domestic population, which goes to show that it's really important. They see it as really important to keep them on side. They're obviously feeling that there's a very real chance that decisions they make going forward might be very unpopular in terms of mobilization, that the population could turn against them, given what's going on in Ukraine. So what they're doing is they're shutting down VPNs, as I discussed yesterday, so they can't get information out from outside. And the information they are getting comes from the state and is very, very curated. And they're getting all this kind of soft propaganda as well, that is trying to influence the thoughts of the domestic population. I just think it's a sign of where Russia are at, and it's a sign of a growing net around the Russian population in terms of information. They are going to be closed in and caught in this bubble where there is no way of seeing out the bubble and understanding what's going on outside of Russia. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. I'm trying to get some live streams sorted out with, goodness me, I've still got people who are connected to Ukraine, like Mark Biscu and others. Hopefully, live stream with some volunteers in Ukraine. There's Exit, who helps out with the marine expertise on Andrew Perpetua's live streams. I should be talking to her. Obviously, Operator Starsky at some point. And a number of others. Also, Paul from Combat Veteran Reacts. I should be doing a live stream with him because I was reaching out with him about the issues we're having. So I was speaking to one of his team. He has a team. Hey, it's just me in my study. And I wonder why I have no time left in the world. And so that's all happening. So thank you so much to those people if they do come on, and I'll keep you in the loop. Thank you so much to Brod, just some big supporters of the channel recently when I've been up against it. Jorg Prinslin, Brod, really appreciate that. Gert Huisman, who else? I mean, there are many of you. Thank you so much. This is just a few of you. Peter Kluken, just insanely generous. Thank you so much. And many, many more. Georg Kundinger, Marquardt, I probably mispronounce these names, and Jediah Van Dyke as well, and many others. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.